the title of the presentation, as you can see, is 2014. This is the, this is which we cannot, has a typo. So it should have been, this is a year in which we cannot ignore SCADA. And before I begin, I'll give a quick introduction because it's a little bit needed for what we are going to talk about. So what my team does is we work for a company called Qualys, and we write vulnerability signatures. So what are vulnerability signatures? So basically what the product does is it scans our customers' network for threats, for vulnerabilities, for any means and ways in which an attacker could exploit your network. And I have actually a few of my colleagues right here in the audience, and null guys have told me that you can talk about your company only in the first slide. So the last thing that I'm going to say is that we are hiring in Pune, so feel free to get in touch with me. So alright, agenda, we have about 40-50 minutes, and in the next 40-50 minutes we'll briefly go over some of the SCADA components, or the sort of an anatomy of a SCADA system. So what does a SCADA system look like? Now I know not all SCADA systems are same. In fact, SCADA has a lot of diversity, and a lot of, you could say, database systems sort of look alike, a lot of web servers look alike. But a SCADA system is something which is really diverse. So what we are going to try to do here is sort of get on the same common ground to understand some of the basic concepts of industrial control systems, of SCADA systems, so that we can better look at them. Also, this is the part, if you have attended some of my previous talks, I talk about these SCADA components in all my talks initially, so that everyone is on the same page. So if you have seen this before, just be patient for just like a few minutes, and we'll get through it. We'll also look, secondly, so after looking at what SCADA components are, what really is a SCADA system, we'll look at some of the vulnerabilities for the last 1 year in 2013, as well as some of the vulnerabilities some of the SCADA vulnerabilities that were found in early 2014. So we'll do a little bit of analysis of what these vulnerabilities are, what are the components which are affected, and take a quick overview about them. And last but not least, we'll look at some of the recommendations and proposals of what people who are in charge of a SCADA infrastructure can do to secure these systems. As I told you, that SCADA systems are really diverse, so there is no one size that fits all, so you would have to sort of take it with a grain of salt, and while implementing it in your own systems, apply some of the concepts that we can develop here. So does that sound like a good agenda? Only 3 things. So let's get started. So to begin with, SCADA is a pretty generic term. Okay, how many of you know the full form, like what does SCADA stand for? 1. I wouldn't that's about it. So what does it mean? Supervisory control and data acquisition. I'm pretty sure all of you know what a SCADA system is. It's just that the acronym is a little bit of a tongue twister. So SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition. It is also called as ICS in some context, industrial control systems. It is also called as DCS, distributed control systems. So instead of just looking at these acronyms, let's look at some of the pictures that may be more familiar to all of us. So what we see here are some electrical power lines, some gas pipelines, some windmills on the top, and on the bottom we see some industrial control systems, like there is this donut manufacturing plant where you can see like all these donuts are going in a conveyor belt to get fried, or I guess they're just being fried. There is automobile manufacturing, which is the central picture, and so on and so forth. So all these type of systems sort of constitute of either SCADA system or industrial control systems or distributed control systems. The main difference is that the systems which are on the top, they are really distributed, as in the sensors which sends data can be thousands and thousands of miles away from the control center. So there could be a sensor on one of those power lines, or a sensor inside a windmill, and the controller of that sensor could be literally in a different state. So the windmill could be in Goa while the controller could be somewhere in Mumbai. So the systems on top are really distributed, while the ones that you see at the bottom, they are huge systems, but they are not as distributed. They are still isolated in like one factory or a couple of factories, maybe in Goa or so on and so forth, but they are not as distributed as the ones on top. That's the only difference. So, but for the sake of this talk, what we'll do is we'll just call all of them as SCADA. And I know there are like minute differences between all of these, but for simplicity, let's just call them as SCADA, so that at least for the sake of this talk. So this is a quick graph of some of the vulnerabilities that we have been tracking from 2009 to 2013 for SCADA systems. And it's actually no longer estimated because 2003 is over. But as I mentioned to you before, what we do is we constantly track vulnerabilities on a day-to-day basis, and we create signatures to identify these vulnerabilities. So what we did for SCADA systems is we said that, okay, well, when we are analyzing this vulnerability on a day-to-day basis, vulnerabilities like Microsoft Patch Tuesday, which was just last week, or Adobe patches that are released, or the Oracle CPU that Oracle releases. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware of these patches and vulnerabilities that are patched by various vendors. So what we do is we track these patches as well as we do some original research in finding new and different vulnerabilities. So this is a quick snapshot of how much SCADA vulnerabilities have increased over time. And what we will do really quickly, as I mentioned, this could be a little bit of a repeat from if you have attended some of my previous presentations, but we'll try to understand what a SCADA system is. So the things on the left are more of sensors, and these are the things that are really far away from the things which are on the right, which are basically controlling those sensors. Oh, sure. Is that good? Yeah. So for now, I mean, there is no need to make this more complicated. Just from where these things are installed, the things on the left could be really far away, and the things on the right are where they are being controlled. So this is the field here, and this is the control center. So let's take a little bit, let's look deeply at what these different blocks are. So the first block, as I like to call, is our data acquisition devices. So they contain, what they basically do is they convert typically parameters like light, temperature, or pressure to analog signals. And what you have here is a photo sensor, a pressure sensor, and a temperature sensor, which, as I mentioned before, just try to remember those windmills and those power plants that I talked about. So this pressure sensor could be in one of the gas pipelines or oil pipelines somewhere. The photo sensor could be also again in some of these devices, which is trying to detect how much light we have. It could be on the solar panels and conveying information about, you know, how is the light, or where is the light, which could in return turn the solar panel in some direction. So these are basically data acquisition components which have two-way sort of communication with the next component, which is the data conversion component. Now what happens here is that these components include things like PLCs, IEPs or RTUs. So a PLC is a programmable logic controller, which is nothing but a circuit board. IED is what they call as an intelligent electronic device, which is again also just a glorified form of circuit board, and this is like a real-time unit. So what this component does is it converts the data that it has received from the first component, the acquisition component, into most probably some sort of digital signals. And to give you like a perspective of how big or how small they are, there is a person here who is holding like a PLC, which in my guess is being mounted on some sort of a radio tower. That's what it looks like, but I'm not 100% sure. So, okay, so what we have, go ahead.
Can you expand more about PLC? What exactly is the use of?
So it's programmable logic controllers, and again, the reason I told you like really earlier, take it with a grain of salt, is because these days you have PLCs, which are components like these, which also do the functionality of this, which it senses, and it also does some more functionality of this. So, but usually what a PLC does is it acquires data from the data acquisition components. It converts it in some sort of form, which can be passed to the SCADA master or from where that PLC is being controlled. So if, for example, let's take an example of a windmill or something, then what the PLC will do is take analog data from the sensors, most probably convert it into some sort of digital format which the SCADA master can understand, and also use one of the many SCADA communication protocols to communicate that data to the SCADA master. Which sort of good question. And again, feel free to ask questions at any time, because it's better that we do this more of an interactive of a session rather than waiting for questions at the end. So just feel free to just ask, interrupt me anytime. So this is the second sort of a component, which is the data conversion component. And as I just mentioned, it sort of converts data and uses one of these communication protocols to talk to the SCADA master. Now this exactly is not really a component, it's just a protocol. So example of a protocol that everybody here would be knowing is HTTP or FTP. It's a protocol, it's a standard by which a client talks to the server. So similarly, SCADA has tons of proprietary and non-proprietary protocols, but nowadays people are more or less standardizing on those. But these are just some of the examples, like Modbus, DNP3, OPC. These are the most common SCADA protocols. If you talk with anyone in industrial control, they would know this is like their HTTP or FTP. It's like a very, very, very common SCADA protocol. Then you have TJAS, Profibus, which is also pretty common, DeviceNet, and so on and so forth. So what happens here is data gets from these PLCs, IEDs, or RTUs to the SCADA master in the form of these protocols. Now again, the physical means of communication could be different. It could be wired, it could be wireless, it could be radio, and again it depends on what typical industrial control system that you're looking at.
All these SCADA systems are real-time systems, right?
Most of them, yeah.
What if you sensors and what the PLCs are in field and from the master somewhere else?
Yeah.
By the communication, is there any disturbance, then it will be a very big above for that entire system.
That's right.
So how they will manage that thing, like this communication, if that is somewhere else and this is somewhere else?
So it's a very good question, and I am really thankful that you asked it. That is one of the major cause of concern, is that, and we will look at it more in detail as we move forward, but one of the cause of concern is all these protocols were developed 20, 30, some of them were developed 40 years ago, some of them were developed even before TCP/IP. So they didn't work on TCP/IP. They used to work on serial or some other dedicated type of communication. Now they are just ported to TCP/IP because, for example, you take Modbus. What they have done is they just put the entire Modbus packet into your TCP packet, and now that's why it runs on TCP/IP. But a lot of these protocols do not have security built in as SSL or TLS or things like that, and that is a pretty good, pretty common, pretty easy attack vector that if you can get in between here, between the communication, you can easily sniff the traffic, not just understand what's going on, but also change what's going on. And we'll look at it more as we sort of try to analyze vulnerabilities in each of these components. It's just that we are not really aware that it is a SCADA application. So if you go to any sort of a factory floor, they will have PLCs and they will have industrial control where there is a central management unit, and from the central console they can see which belt is running or not, or what are the machines actually doing. It's just that before this it was not sort of consolidated and given this term called SCADA or ICS. I mean, if you talk to some of the ICS guys, they will say that okay, this has been there for years, and a lot of SCADA systems have been around for years. So if you take example of a dam, I mean, how do you open the floodgates of a dam? There is no mechanical control. Someone in the central monitoring system just presses a button and lowers the gate. Or how does the person knows how much water is in a particular section of a dam or a reservoir? It's basically because there are pressure sensors mounted in the reservoir. So they are SCADA systems are everywhere. In dams and in all the examples that I showed above, and more commonly in all manufacturing factories which are automated. I mean, there are still a lot of factories which are sort of manual, but I think by now most of them are automated. So
I have one more question. I saw a couple of videos in the YouTube where one guy tries to hack the traffic signals, and then he tries to change it to the number of kilometers to 200 kilometers, the speed. I mean, all those things, is it possible or?
Well, I mean,
I'm not sure it was a real video.
Again, I haven't seen that video, but it is definitely possible, because again, if you think of it logically, how do these traffic signals work? There is, I mean, sometimes there are a lot of old traffic signals are dumb traffic signals where they will turn on and off red, yellow, green for a certain defined time, and that's it. So those are difficult to hack because they are dumb, because they don't care how much traffic is flowing or not. They will just say 5 minutes to you, 5 minutes to you, 5 minutes to you. But a lot of newer traffic signals are intelligent traffic signals, and what they do is there are sensors which are located in the road, and it is not as common in here as much, but in a lot of Western countries, in the United States and Europe, it's very, very common that all traffic, I mean, all roads have these sensors underneath, and freeways also have sensors underneath or on top, which provide real-time data, and that's how this traffic signal behaves. So if there is no one coming on that road, the light will be red, and it will be green for other folks coming in another direction, and whenever the car appears, it will automatically sense that a car is coming and it will give that thing. So it is definitely possible, because it's again the same type of system where you have constant monitoring, and decisions are being made, either most probably in case of traffic signals they are made automatically, and there is no operator sort of involved in the control station. But yeah, that is definitely possible. So okay, moving on, we have the first component is where you acquire data, the second component is where you sort of massage, convert that data, the third component is where you communicate that data, and at the end of the day, the data lands up sort of here, which is presentation and control, or in the control system, where you have operators which are, depending on what the system is, they monitor these SCADA systems 24/7. So here it's an example of a very proprietary type of SCADA system. As I mentioned, a lot of systems, like say for example a dam, could be 50 or 80 years old, and there you see a lot of proprietary sort of system where it looks a little bit foreign, but more and more in modern factories you see SCADA controllers, or HMI, or human machine interface as it is called in SCADA world, look like this. So they are your normal Solaris, Windows type of machines, and they have replaced these old sort of proprietary terminals into, this is how it looks today. It's like sort of a regular PC by which you can control the application. It could be like a traffic signal, a dam, or a power plant, a factory floor, whatever it may be. So this is sort of how I like to sort of dissect the SCADA system, so that it's easier to understand the vulnerabilities and to study them. So that's sort of the part one of our presentation. So let's go in the three things that I had on the agenda. So let's look at some of the vulnerabilities that were discovered in the last year or so in all these components. And if you look at them, there were almost zero. I mean, there were some vulnerabilities, but because of the number of vulnerabilities here were large, this appears as 0 or 0 point something, so it got rounded off as 0. So there were almost no vulnerabilities, at least there were no vulnerabilities reported on the data acquisition components. And the easy way to understand is that this component is a very simple component. Like if you think of a photo sensor, it's a very simple component, maybe analog. They just sense photons, basically light, and pass it away. Also, you need physical access to do any type of tampering with it. So, okay, if you want to hack the first component, which is, let's say, a photo sensor, light sensor, pressure sensor, yeah, the easiest thing is to come here to hack the communication. But to hack the sensor itself, you have to have physical access to that particular sensor. And that's why we are not seeing much threats, or at least this research is for the last 1 year. So in 2013, there were almost none vulnerabilities reported which were of that type in the data acquisition components. The second is the data conversion components. So we saw about 11% of all SCADA vulnerabilities were in data conversion, which was in PLCs, in IEDs, in those type of things, the components that you just saw. About 22% of vulnerabilities were in communication, and that's pretty expected. I mean, it's pretty expected, because if you want to hack into something, instead of hacking into the photo sensor, it's easier to hack into the communication line. And basically, when the photo sensor senses something and it is telling that, okay, move the solar panel here, you hack the communication and you tell something else, so that the operator thinks that, oh, I should move the solar panel maybe in a different direction. So a lot of these vulnerabilities are in communication, and actually when we were doing research, I was expecting that the most amount of vulnerabilities should be in communication, because that's the easiest attack vector. But to my surprise, most vulnerabilities, about 66%, were in presentation and control. This is basically the control center. We saw some pictures as examples where an operator is controlling these different SCADA systems. So let's again deep dive a little bit into this. We already talked about data acquisition. You need physical access. Some of the vulnerabilities that we saw in PLCs were, like, say, these are some of the examples. So for example, there was Emerson RTU, which used to send network beacons. Basically, it used to, again, a lot of these are, well, this is not that old of a device, but what it did was to tell where it is located. It used to periodically send a network beacon that I'm here for anyone to find. And it was obviously designed to to be useful for operators to know where their systems are, but again an attacker can also now hear that beacon and accurately find out where the particular PLC is located. On top of that, there was this debug port open on the service.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Beacon part, I didn't get what is the network beacon?
So network beacon is basically if you have lots of devices, at the end of the day, how would you know where is your device in a really distributed network? So if the device is beaconed to the server exactly knows that, okay, this device is here, this device is there. It could be as simple as a ping packet and the server knows that, okay, I'm alive. On top of that, it had a debug port open, so these should not be allowed in production basically because it's a debug port. But what happens is a lot of times when you get a piece of hardware, it is just installed in production without security in mind. So what happens now, the attacker not only knows where the device is because the network beacons, but also he or she can easily connect to the debug port and take basically full control of that PLC. So again, we are not going to look closely at this vulnerability or any vulnerability because we want to discuss a lot of them in a very short time. But this is just an example of one of the vulnerabilities in this component. You can look it up by CVE or whatnot. Also, I've also meticulously made sure that only one vendor is, that each vendor is represented only once, so that I'm not trying to bash one vendor or something like that. And it was really easy because there was a vulnerability in all SCADA vendors. So this is in Emerson. There was a Siemens vulnerability, a pretty much similar vulnerability in one of the PLCs. Again, a little bit of the same story here where some UDP debug port was open where you can easily connect to it. In communication, this is the further distribution of what the vulnerabilities look like. So here you have different SCADA protocols, Modbus, DNP3, IGMP is not really a SCADA protocol, it's a generic protocol, but these few are the SCADA protocols, these few are our normal protocols that we use every day. And this is just a distribution of how vulnerabilities look like. So basically for Modbus and DNP3, Modbus is used mostly in industrial controls. DNP3 was designed from the ground up for the electrical system, and it's used mostly in North and South America for controlling the electrical grid. A lot of these protocols, as I mentioned, are really old and have no security measures. So just like as you pointed out in the beginning, something which should have been very obvious 40 years ago, but 40 years ago it was not very obvious that anyone could snoop in the communication channel and change what is being communicated. It was partly because at that time when these protocols were designed, it was assumed that this system is a closed system, so there cannot be any intruder in the system. So that was a big assumption that was made, which is not true anymore because more and more these systems are being connected to the network as well as even to the internet. So everyone has heard about SCADA or Stuxnet, right? The Stuxnet virus. So when Stuxnet was in the news, there is a service called as Shodan, shodan.hq. You can Google it and check it out. It tells you, you just input a banner, like everyone knows about a HTTP server like Apache or IIS. So you just input Apache and it will tell you how many systems are on the internet which use Apache based on the banner. So it's a banner grabbing service. It's a free service. You can go there and check it out, shodan.hq. So when Stuxnet was released, a lot of people started searching on things like Siemens, on various RTUs and PLC banners, and a lot of these systems are now being connected to the internet. That's where the vulnerability part of it comes in, as in when the systems were designed maybe 10 years ago, it was assumed that it's a closed system, air-gapped system, but now the systems are no longer air-gapped, they are on the internet. So that also that brings out a lot of attack vectors which were not there before. I'm going to quickly run through this because we are running out of time. So this is an example of a Modbus vulnerability again, where a denial of service vulnerability in Triangle Research, Nano, in Schneider Electric, in Galileo, And again, this is just a small snapshot of the vast amount of vulnerabilities that we found in the last year or so. Some examples of DNP3 vulnerabilities. The presentation is online or on the CD, so you can look up these CDs if you're interested more in studying what the vulnerabilities were about. But I'm going to sort of breeze through them right now. So, generally speaking, if you do a security analysis of any protocol, there are three things, right? Integrity, availability, and confidentiality. Confidentiality is basically who can access the system and are you authorized to access the system. So we already discussed that a lot of these protocols, they do not have any authentication or authorization. So if you connect to, for example, a Modbus server, it won't ask you who you are. It won't ask you a password or anything. You can just connect to a server as long as you know where it is and give it instructions, and it will follow your instructions. So man of middle attack is, it's not even an attack. You don't need to do anything to really exploit this. And there is a free tool in here that I wrote like a few years ago that you can check out. What it can do is it can scan for Modbus and DNP3 devices on your network, and where you can sort of try to hack them and things like that. So check it out. It's on Google. It's called SCADA scan, and it's mostly deals with this component, the communication component, the SCADA protocol component. And lastly, well, okay, these are some more examples of the communication vulnerabilities that we saw in 2013. A lot of vulnerabilities in some of the known protocols that we use, TFTP, SSH, SNMP, things like that. So this is just to illustrate that there are a lot of vulnerabilities in SCADA proprietary protocols as well as in generic protocols that are used in SCADA systems. And last but not least, remember this had the highest number of vulnerabilities last year, 66%. So this is the distribution of where the vulnerabilities were. And a lot of vulnerabilities are something that you and me, we know very well, like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, database related vulnerabilities, directory traversal, CSRF, ActiveX-based vulnerabilities. So, why are we seeing these type of vulnerabilities in SCADA, where I was really expecting the communication type of vulnerabilities to be in SCADA? I think the answer is pretty clear, and you must know, you must have guessed that by now, is that I think about maybe 15 years ago when Windows was introduced, 15-20 years ago when Windows 3.1, I see some gray hair, so you are old enough to remember Windows 3.1 was introduced. Before, like say 15 or 20 years, a lot of SCADA systems were proprietary. They were not, they were built for that application. When Windows was introduced, the SCADA owners told their vendors that, hey, why can't you use this operating system and communicate your PLCs and sensors to a HMI, to the controller, which would be on Windows. The vendors did that, and it created a huge cost saving for everyone, because now instead of building this proprietary system for a dam, you have a Windows machine or a Solaris machine which can control the dam doors. And it was nice, cost savings of 50% or more. But the bad thing what happened because of it is now all vulnerabilities that affect Windows or Solaris now also affect your SCADA system, because your system is not a proprietary system anymore. So guess what? Every patch Tuesday when you apply patches to your workstations, you have to patch your dam, or you have to patch your windmill or things like that. And those things don't really happen because on a workstation I can easily install a patch and nothing much will go wrong. Even if it goes wrong, I have backups and I don't care about my workstation. But most of the SCADA systems which now use off-the-shelf software are never patched, because it's a lot of risk to patch a system which controls a dam. Because what if the patch doesn't work correctly, or if the system starts malfunctioning? These systems were designed not to be touched or not to be fiddled around a lot. And that's the reason most of the time when we go into an engagement, we see that a lot of these SCADA systems are not patched. They are using Windows 2000, Windows 98, Windows 95, which are full of vulnerabilities. And it's not like people there are lazy or they don't want to patch it, they don't want to upgrade it, but they don't want to get this continuous cycle where every patch Tuesday or other, just a second, other Adobe or Oracle patch days, they have to retest the whole functioning of a DAM, which is just impossible. Good.
You said they will be using Windows system, but these are applications, right? They would have used some kind of language to build these applications. What are those languages and
so there is
what
no
vulnerabilities are associated with it? Are they using any kind of database or stuff like that?
So they are using databases, and that's what I was referring to. Is initially we have some SCADA systems which had a proprietary sort of storage of data, where you won't even call it like a real database. But now they use databases like Oracle or MySQL or things like that to store data. So which is good. They don't have to reinvent the wheel, but also that your Oracle vulnerabilities are now affecting your solar system or your, not your solar system, your solar plant or things like that. So, okay, I'm almost done, but I do have a lot of content.
I have one more follow-up question.
Let's do questions afterwards because I almost have a lot of slides left. And I mean, I think the next speaker is already here. So, these are some of the, again, some vulnerabilities in the SCADA master. So what is the real sort of, apart from all these small vulnerabilities that we see, the real world issue? And the real world issue is that a SCADA system is connected to the intranet or to the internet. I think that is the real issue which is causing this SCADA havoc. If it was like 20 years ago where the system is air-gapped, then it doesn't matter how much vulnerabilities it has. No one cares. But now, since you find a lot of SCADA systems, if you just look at Codan and try to browse the internet, you will find a system which is the SCADA master or a user interface to control a factory or a dam or whatnot online. That is the real challenge, I think, that we are seeing here. A lot of these challenges, I won't reiterate, we saw them as we were talking about other things. Another bigger challenge is the long life cycle of a SCADA system. So it's if there is a vulnerability in my phone or my desktop or my workstation, I will possibly patch it or I'll just replace it in a year or so. But it's very difficult to change the working of an industrial control system, a factory floor, or the applications where these type of embedded things are being used. So they are typically meant to last for decades. So it's not very easy to even change small components of them. These are some of the proposals. I won't go through any of these. Look at the slides for these proposals. I think after this presentation, we can also chat during lunch or just after the presentation if you want to go through a lot of other details. One of them is the SCADA test environment, which is very easy for me to say that, okay, why don't you have, to the customers, why don't you have a test environment so that whenever there is a patch released by Microsoft and if your SCADA infrastructure runs on Microsoft, you can test it. But in reality, it's not possible at all. We have found 0 people who have a spare factory system where they can test their patches. That never really happens. So these are some of the proposals, and I'm really sorry I couldn't go through them in detail. But again, we can discuss a lot of them over lunch or just after the presentation. This is the utility that I was talking about, the SCADA scan utility, which is on the internet, which you can download and sort of play around with it. So we are out of time, right? Yep. So that's about it. 2 more minutes. Oh, so maybe we have 2 more minutes for questions. But that slide didn't came out right. But that's about it. Thank you. You can look at my Twitter handle or ask me some questions on Twitter if you have those. Or since we have 2 minutes, we can do it right now or after the talk. Thank you.